So, you've been watching animated shows and movies, and you've decided that you want to try making animations for yourself. Looking up some tutorials on YouTube, you've stumbled upon this video, and hopefully you'll stick around to learn how exactly to get started. My name's Eiley. I'm a digital artist, animator, and content creator online, and this video is kind of my sad excuse to revive my YouTube channel from like 5 years ago. Anyway, I'm a sophomore in college learning animation, and I've decided to make a video on how to get started in animation, whether you're going to school for it or if you're teaching yourself. I've worked on many different projects and animated ideas since I was in about 7th grade. I used to watch animated storytime videos and TV shows, and I always wanted to make my own content. So, I began working on different projects, which a lot of them fell through due to me being a kid and not knowing exactly how all that works. But, as a result, I've gotten many good connections and skills built along the way. Regardless, I have some good experience with this type of stuff, and today, I want to teach you how to get started with animation. Enough rambling, though. Let's get straight into it. Before you can begin animation, you need to know the general basics of what things are. Animation is made with something we call frames. Frames are multiple images put together in a certain time frame to create a moving image. This ties back to the way our eyes work. Our eyes pick up multiple images flashing on top of each other in an animation and put it together as moving objects. It's entirely just an optical illusion. But over the years, we've learned to improve our skills in the way we see things, from a rotating carousel of horses to 3D generated animated movies with realistic rendering. These are a few good things to know when first starting animation, especially if you're still looking into software. If you want to make insane and beautiful 3D animations, for example, you're going to want to make sure you have a good computer with a good graphics card and a lot of storage. You also want to keep in mind how much you're willing to pay. There are a lot of good animation programs out there for free. Blender is a great example for 3D animation. But if you're just getting started and you don't mind the watermarks, a good starting app I used when learning animation was Flip-A-Clip on my phone. It's not the best quality, but when you're learning how to put frames together and make your film look smooth, it's a great starting point. For this tutorial, I will be using Clip Studio Paint EX. It's a monthly payment program, but it gets the job done and shows many different tools you can use, which I believe is great for this tutorial. You probably don't want to hear me talk more about the boring fundamentals of animation and want to get straight into it. Luckily, it's time for us to get started. When getting ready to animate a scene, the first thing you'll do is open your program. Your opening screen may look different than mine depending on what program you're using. For this tutorial, once again, I'm using Clip Studio Paint. Firstly, you're going to want to create a file for your scene. Usually there should be some sort of New Project button on your interface, but most programs also let you go to File, New, and then New Animation. Name your file what you'd like to call your animation, and save it somewhere where you can find it easily. Here, you will also choose the frame rate, how many frames play back per second. Most animations use 24 frames per second, but if you're just starting out, feel free to use a lower frame rate. I am going to animate in 24 frames per second, but animate in twos, meaning that every frame I draw will last for 2 frames instead of 1. This is kind of a neat way of cheating your animation by using a high frame rate for smoother animation with less frames. It also helps with intricate motions, but that's a more advanced topic. Future Eiley here. I realized during my tutorial that Clip Studio did not want to smoothly animate in twos, so I changed that later on. But animate however you want, because you can always adjust the frames later, just as I'll do. With your file created, it's time to start looking at what tools you have available. This may be different for every program, but I'll be going over the basic tools you'll be using for your animation. The first tool is the common one, the pen tool. With the pen, you can drag the mouse over the screen and draw anything you want. Alongside the pen tool is the eraser tool. It's just as it sounds. With the eraser, you can erase any marks and drawings you have on your layer. The third tool I'd like to bring up is your fill tool, also known as the paint bucket tool. The fill tool can fill in color to an enclosed drawing, making it easier to color in your drawings. Layers are different planes you can draw on as to not directly draw on your other work. It's almost like drawing on multiple canvases that are transparent and layered over each other, just as animators did in the past before all these fancy programs came out. So, how does this relate to the fill tool? When you want to build a drawing with color, it's a wise decision to draw on a layer under it, but some programs require you to adjust your tool settings to allow it to refer to the other layer and not just fill in the empty layer you're on. settings can usually be found in every program. Whether it's changing your brush size or adjusting your layers, it's good to know where it goes. If you're animating along with this video, I'll give you a chance here to pause and learn your program. Play around with it and see what tools and options are available to you. For everyone else watching, let's actually begin animating now. For this tutorial, we are going to animate in what's known as a straight-ahead method. Normally, animators will have a storyboard and an animatic to use as a reference for different keyframes and breakdown poses. But this is a little more advanced for first starting out, so for the sake of learning the basics, we're going to use a straight-ahead method and draw frame by frame and just kinda go with it. The best animation to make when you're first starting out or testing a program is, you guessed it, the bouncing ball. This is because animating a simple bouncing ball uses a lot of the 12 principles of animation, which are 12 fundamentals for bringing life to your character and making a fluid animation. The basic ones we're going to cover in this tutorial are exaggeration, squash and stretch, and arcs. I'll explain these as we create our bouncing ball. Let's begin with laying down our first frame. Firstly, we begin with a circle for our ball. After you draw your circle on your first frame, create a new frame and draw the ball's next action. Because we have it moving and bouncing, we're going to draw it to the side in its next position, and so forth in future frames. As you draw your ball moving, try to make use of the arcs principle. When an object is moving or jumping in some dynamic way, use circles and arcs to give it variance and life. As we see here, the ball jumps in the air and falls down in an arc. And now, we get to it hitting the ground. We now want to draw the ball hitting the ground in our next frame. This is where we make use of the squash and stretch principle of animation. If an object with weight hits something else, it will squash, kind of like dropping a stress ball on the ground and watching it flatten out briefly. But before the object squashes, it will stretch. So, to put this principle into practice, we draw the ball stretching in the frame up until it hits the ground, which then becomes its squash. Right after the squash, the ball will stretch again, then go back up into the arc aforementioned. Keep repeating this process of arcs, squashes, and stretches frame by frame, and lower the arc the more it bounces and loses momentum. Once you have all your frames drawn, go ahead and play back your animation to see what you've made. It's not going to look perfect from the start, meaning you'll have to adjust the length of your frames. I want to give some exaggeration to our ball. When it's in mid-air, I want it to stay a bit longer. So for the frames I drew where it's at the top of the arc, I'll stretch out those frames. Now let's see what we have. Looking good! Let's add some color. I'm going to create a separate layer underneath the line art layer, which will be my color. Decide what color you want your ball to be. For this, I'm choosing blue. I'm going to fill my line art with color. First, though, I need to make sure my fill tool settings are adjusted to reference other layers instead of just its own. This way, it will locate the line art in the other layer and fill in its boundaries. Let's start filling in our frames. Now that we got some color, let's see our animation. I'm loving it so far. I think I'd like to add some shading in the background. To shade, create another layer over your color layer and clip it to the color layer. This allows whatever you draw to reference only the layer it's clipped to, meaning it will only draw in the area of the color. You can be fancy and put settings on your layers to make the shadow look better. For beginners, set your layer to multiply and lower the opacity a little. Use whatever color your shadow should be and begin filling it in. I'm using a bit of color theory in my shading. When it comes to shadows, it's best to use the complementary color of your main color when using the multiply layer. If we look at the color wheel, the complementary color, or the color opposite of it, is yellow. So, for this shadow, I'm using a darker shade of yellow to shade with. Now that we've got our shadow, let's import a background. You can draw one in your animation using the layers and tool settings learned in this video, or you can import a background you've already drawn. We have our background added, so now it's time to see the final product. Wow! Look at that for your first animation! You've learned not only how basic animation works, but also some principles of animation to make it more lively and fluid. Let's export our animation now. To render and export the animation, locate the Export button. It's usually in the File tab. Some programs are particular with their export settings, but most programs will give you simple options to export into, whether you want it as a GIF, a video, or all of the frames. Exporting it as a video is the basic choice. If you export it as a GIF, it will loop continuously and tends to have a little bit lower quality. Exporting frames is the process used for post-production editing. Let's say I wanted to bring my video into an editing program and add more features. To maintain the quality, I would export all the frames and import it into my other program as an image sequence. This is a little more complex, so for beginners, feel free to just use a video or a GIF. And now we have our animation. After this, you're welcome to explore different editing programs if you'd like to add sounds or special effects. A good paid editing program I use is Adobe After Effects. But if you're just beginning and don't mind watermarks, I'd recommend checking out KindMaster, which is the app I used when I first began. You can find royalty-free sound effects on YouTube, or go to freesound.org to download free sound effects that others have created and uploaded for independent projects. And with that, this concludes your guide to your first easy animation, the bouncing ball. If you'd like to get more detailed into animation or learn about character design, character animation, or more, stay tuned for future videos of mine by subscribing and turning on the notification bell. Thank you all for watching, and I can't wait to see the amazing animations you create.